Hello, good evening. I am Ajit Kumar Jha, CEO of Power Pixar Channel. And today in the Public Global, I'll focus on uh, the Narendra Modi Donald Trump meeting in Washington, the Indo-US, meeting that just took place. And let's first look at what most um, analysts are saying in general in the mainstream media, because that's the one that sort of first comes as a response. And you will notice that most of them end up giving a headline which seem to suggest mission accomplished. You see, the trouble is that when there is a joint sort of statement by two countries that are talking, the joint statement which is given to the press all has the goodies. It doesn't actually highlight in a way the tensions in this partnership that we are going to see in the future and that we saw initially when President Trump, about a month ago, when he sort of joined as president, he has announced, the tariff war that he has began, the 25% tariffs that he has imposed on steel and aluminium, sort of for all countries, right? Any kind of concessions that there were in the past on steel and aluminium, he has completely ended with one sleight of hand. Now, that is where the negotiation starts from. So let's put it this way: before President Trump, under Biden, we did not have to deal with such a imposition of tariffs as Trump has begun. Number one. Number two, on the same day that Modi and Donald Trump met, President Trump also signed a memo ordering reciprocal tariffs on all trading partners. Now, there is a catch there. Most analysts have not even considered this. They just talk about the typical, the joint statement that was given to the press. And as I said, those are made to give good headlines. And the press immediately ran. They have to file a story, both in television and in the Indian media. So they all give that, mission accomplished, great success, what a great job. Even someone as savvy as Shashi Tharoor of the Congress party has ended up saying, oh, it's not such a bad deal. Uh, Maybe Mr. Tharoor understands diplomacy, but doesn't quite understand tariff. Uh, and what reciprocal tariff means, it actually is a declaration for a trade war. And, what Mr. Modi has simply done with Mr. Trump is he has bought time. The idea was that we will negotiate these sort of tariffs, Indian tariffs, for example, that the US claims is very high on certain products. In fact, Mr. Trump, even in the press conference and otherwise, has been saying that India has the highest tariffs in the world, and that we will force, in a way, India to cut down its tariffs. And if you saw in the budget and right before the meeting, India had started slashing its own tariffs. So, in a way, we conceded defeat even before the meeting. We did not actually negotiate with Trump with a firm hand like China has done. China has not, the US has, of course, given China about a month, as it has given Canada and Mexico, when it ended up imposing 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada and 10% on China. But the truth is that the China has also started putting heavy tariffs against US exports. And do remember that the trade between China and the US is much, much more than that between India and the US. We are their 10th we are their 10th largest partner, whereas China is their first largest trading partner. So China is 10 times ahead of us when it comes to you know, trade with the US, uh, we have a $45 billion trade surplus with the US, when our total trade with the US is about, let's say, 130, 140, some people, about 130, 118 billion was the last figures. There have been some revised estimates since then. The US is our second largest trading partner after China. But of course, the difference between the US and China is very small. But the US is our second largest trading partner now, given the latest figures. So we do have a trade surplus, but what President Trump began, if you remember, if you have heard the joint press conference where the translations were taking place, uh, right in the beginning, President Trump, in his opening statement, said, and he began with that. He said that, we have a lot of oil and we have a lot of gas, and India needs oil and gas, and we have oil and gas, so we are going to sell it to India. The prices were not negotiated. A funny thing. Now, in order to end our trade surplus and to bring about a trade balance, India would have to buy huge amounts of oil and gas from the US. By the way, this is not a free market. Why? Because until recently, we were purchasing huge amounts of oil from Russia at below market price. In fact, Russia had slashed market prices. Some estimates go, almost a quarter, 25% below market price. We were buying, and that was a rupee ruble trade. Whereas with the US, we have to purchase in dollars. Number one, the dollar is almost touching now close to 90 rupees. So again, and we have to purchase in big quantities. Well, there is a embargo in buying from Iran, an embargo now from buying from Russia, from other countries in a way. So our traditional trade patterns from which we were gaining enormously is going to change, and we have to almost quote unquote forced to buy this huge amount of oil and gas from the US. Other than that, we have to buy huge amounts of arms from the US. Armament, that the US has the largest armament industry, and India is the largest arms purchaser. Now, some people will say that, well, we are getting the latest, high-tech aircraft. There was a commitment to that, and several other. We need to modernize our air force. All that is good, but earlier you were purchasing it in the open market. Now you will be forced to buy from one player. So in a way, you're dealing with a monopolist. And when you're dealing with a monopolist, then and you are not you don't have a what one would call a monopsony right. You as a customer cannot dictate terms. Then the US would end up dictating terms to you. In fact, I was looking at the amount of goods that we are supposed to buy from the US, in which, motorcycle, last time also, if you remember, when President Trump had come to India, at that point, if you remember that big meeting in Ahmedabad with Mr. Modi, and later on the meeting in Texas, Houston, with between Mr. Modi and President Trump. Even at that time, President Trump was sort of almost pushing Harley Davidson motorcycles. Now, I don't think in India there is a big market for Harley Davidson motorcycles, because Indian roads, are heavily sort of clogged, and there's hardly space for a huge motorcycle there. There might be a few guys, rich chaps, who might buy it, but it's an extraordinarily expensive motorbike, much more expensive than most of our cars. And, but again, we have to purchase that, number one. Number two, duck meat. I mean, how many Indians eat duck meat? I mean, Chinese do. He can go and impose duck meat on the Chinese, but Indians, most of majority India is vegetarian. The rest who are non-veg barely eat mutton and fish and chicken. Beyond that, you rarely find Indians eating other kinds of I mean, I am talking about majority Indians. There might be a minority eating. I just went recently to Nepal, and I saw that in Nepal, for example, Nepalis eat a lot of birds that we in India rarely eat. So we are a very different kind of nation, and for us, all this imposition coming from the US, this was not the case under Biden. We were still member of the Quad. So are we today. But as a Quad member, we are not free anymore. We are almost forced into this whole. They are saying that by 2030, which is the next 5 years, they are going to increase bilateral trade between India and the US to $500 billion. Now, in that trade, the first condition will be balance of trade. So the trade surplus that we had, and by the way, when you have a trade surplus, India doesn't dump goods like Chinese do. So the trade surplus we had is because of our competitive spirit. Now, when you force us to buy non-competitive goods from America, then in that case, we are basically not, it's being unfair to us. But our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and our establishment swallowed that, and none in the media have criticized it, which is really a shock. In fact, what I would argue that if Prime Minister Modi was a tough bargainer and believed and thought of our national interest, what he should have argued for with President Trump, clear cut, let's have a free trade agreement between India and the US. Exactly in the same manner, like Prime Minister Modi went and signed a free trade deal with Australia, with the UAE. Right now, a free trade deal is being worked at between India and the United Kingdoms. In fact, this has been going on for some time, even during the previous regime in the UK. Negotiations were going on. Free trade agreement helps both sides, but this entire thing of what one would call retaliatory tariff by trade partners, as the US has already declared, as I said, exactly at the point when President Trump and Mr. Modi met, is not something that is going to help India. In fact, it is going to hurt us. They bring about massive trade distortions and disruption of global value chains. And this is going to work against us. We must seek all kinds of tariff elimination and argue for market access for Indian goods in the US. And in fact, market access for US exports in textiles and apparels, automotive component, all this we should sort of argue against. New Delhi must seek tariff elimination and market access for its US exports. We should be exporting textiles, apparels, automotive components, among other goods. All of these are facing the threat of retaliatory tariff, which we are not realizing. We have just bought time. In November or in autumn, as they said, the negotiations will go on. Precisely all these Indian exports will be hurt. And given the fact that the dollar was sort of the rupee dollar conversion was unfavorable to the rupee, it might have been helping exports a little right now. All that will turn around. So I think that is the biggest problem. And what we the our defense production uh, needs we also need to diversify our sort of we are supposed to get defense products from US. What we were trying to do in the past and what we should be doing is the defense uh, technology, if we can get from the US and manufacture in India under Make in India. But that doesn't seem to be the case. What we are now going to be forced to do is, because of this trade surplus and this sort of increase to $500 billion, the bilateral trade, we have to buy lock, stock, and barrel whatever the Americans would want us to buy. And that is something we must oppose. At the same time, there was hardly anything talked about the way that illegal migrants from India, the way they have been treated recently. Not a word about it. Uh, whether in closed doors, Mr. Modi mentioned, I don't know, but at least out in the open, there was no apology by the Americans the way they treated, our so-called illegal migrants. All of you know that 104 migrants had returned, and subsequently more migrants are going to be returned. But what we saw on television, the way they were shackled and manacled, chained, and were brought in the military aircraft, there was no mention of that in this bilateral meeting between India and the US. And again, the same thing, all kinds of tightening is going to take place in US immigration, even on H-1B visas. Again, that is not been sort of mentioned. So in a way, we just went as if President Trump is such a powerful, strong leader, and we just want to befriend him. And whatever he's saying, he begins by raising tariffs, as I said, on steel and aluminum, 25%. He is talking about retaliatory tariffs, and we are cutting down our tariffs and beginning from a point of, I would call, as if we are inferior. We are not able to negotiate toughly like the Americans do. And this is obviously going to hurt India's trade. It is going to hurt our economy. And we have not been very honest and bold and strong in arguing with the Americans, like what the Chinese have done. In a later video, I'll perhaps come up with exactly what the Chinese have argued and how they have brought about massive retaliatory tariffs against the US. We have completely failed in doing that. So, as I said, okay, retaliatory tariffs are bad from both sides. Start with free trade negotiation. If Mr. Modi could make the Australians do it, the UAE to do it. In fact, there was even an attempt to bring all the GCC, 6 GCC countries on this free trade agreement like India and UAE signed. That was supposed to be the template for all the GCC players. Remember, the UAE is our third largest trading partner. So if we could, even Japan, in fact, in the past, during Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, India and Japan had signed a free trade agreement. So if we can do free trade agreements with these major players, we are going to sign one, as I said, with the UK. Why not with the US? That is what Indians should be bargaining for, rather than concessions, bringing down our tariffs, and yet the Americans are bringing about retaliatory tariffs, and they have announced a sort of 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, which is directly linked to several of our other products, because steel and aluminum tariffs, if you look at, they are not only steel and aluminum. It gets into sort of other products. It affects other products. So, as I said, at the end of it, my conclusion is that let's simplify it in terms of a cricket metaphor, if cricket was being played between Trump and Mr. Modi, Mr. Trump was throwing bouncers at Modi. He was throwing Yorkers at Modi. And Mr. Modi, instead of sort of turning around and hitting sixers, what he has done is he has tried to duck the bouncers and just bought time. Each time there is a ball thrown at outside the off stump, Mr. Modi is either playing defensive, or he's the way the bargaining is going on, it seems he's going to hit the ball outside the off stump and straight a catch in the slips. So in a way, this bargain is not in favor of India, it's in favor of the US. I think the only solution to this is a free trade agreement. Thank you very much.